What do you do when your wife gives her number to a stranger on the dance floor, looks back at you, and smiles like it is a joke? How far can you go, using only facts and the law, when she tells everyone you overreacted and abandoned her, while the footage and messages say something else? Why did my calm good luck at that club become the first step toward the envelope she opened under hospital lights? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Riven Mail, and the night my marriage really changed did not start with a fight. It started with pasta boiling too long and my wife laughing at something on her phone instead of at anything inside our kitchen. I stood at the stove stirring sauce that had already thickened, listening to the small plastic tap of her nails on the screen while our son, Leo, told a long story about a picture he drew at school. He explained how he had drawn the three of us holding hands under a big yellow sun, and he kept asking if we liked it, but Talia only gave him half an answer because her eyes stayed on whatever Sarah and the others were sending in their group chat. I asked how late the club night would go, because I still wanted to pretend it was a date night and not just her and her friends, and she told me in a light tone that it was just a small event. Nothing heavy, only dancing and drinks. She added that I should please not start any lecture about flirting or boundaries again, because she was tired of feeling like she needed permission to breathe. The way she said it made it sound like I was already guilty of something, even though the only thing I had done was ask where she would be. I watched her push her food around the plate without finishing, and I watched Leo slowly stop talking because he understood she was not really with us in that moment. After dinner, while she moved into the bedroom, I sat down at the small desk we kept near the hallway and opened my laptop. On the screen, a plain spreadsheet waited, full of dates, initials, and short, simple notes about late returns, strange messages, and little jokes that cut deeper than she admitted. I had started it months earlier when I felt something shift, not because I wanted to trap her, but because numbers made more sense to me than feelings shouted in the air. I scrolled down and added a new line. Club night, the name of the place, the time she said she would leave, my mood, her mood. Then I minimized the file when I heard Leo's small steps coming down the hallway. He climbed into my lap and asked if we would all dance together like they did in the cartoons, and I told him gently that this would be grown-up dancing, just for his mother and her friends. He asked why they needed dancing without us, and I did not know how to explain that she liked the part of herself that existed when we were not there. I promised him that we would go to the park the next day instead, and that seemed to calm him a little, but his eyes still searched my face for clues that I could not give. In the bedroom, Talia stood in front of the full-length mirror, her clothes spread across the bed like another silent audience. She held dresses up to her body, turning side to side, watching angles I used to memorize for different reasons. She said she needed to look good because the club would be full of cameras and people from work. At one point she laughed and said she wanted to look single for the music, then looked at my reflection to see my reaction. When she saw my face go tight, she waved a hand and told me it was only a joke, that I should learn not to be so serious. I told her that jokes were supposed to make people feel safe, not small, and she replied that nothing I ever said was fun anymore. She mentioned that her friends already thought I was too intense, that I did not let her relax, that they did not understand why she stayed with someone who made everything heavy. She did not say these things as questions, but as facts. I watched her put on a short black dress and change her hair, watched her place small pieces of metal at her ears and wrists, turning herself into the version of Talia that strangers loved. I tried to say she looked beautiful because it was still true, but she took it as empty habit and brushed it aside. When I suggested gently that I could come with her and we could dance together, she shook her head and said it would be weird to have me hanging around her coworkers, that it was nicer for her to be free with them for once. I accepted the answer out loud, but inside I felt something important stepping backwards. Before we left the apartment, I opened my phone calendar and created a small reminder for later in the week called Harbor 9:45 a.m. I picked the name of a quiet cafe near the river, even though I had not decided who I would meet or what I would say there. I just knew I might need a calm place with neutral walls and strong coffee, a place where I could ask serious questions without club music under my feet. I set the reminder, closed the app, and slipped my phone into my pocket. In the hallway by the front door, Leo handed Talia the drawing of our family and asked if she would keep it in her bag. She told him she did not want to crush it and said she would put it on the fridge later, then left it on the console table. He noticed and asked me with his eyes what it meant, but I only told him we would put it up together. When Talia picked up her small purse and her phone, the screen lit suddenly with a new message. I saw, just for a second, that the contact name was only a single flame emoji, and the preview said that the club would be wild tonight. She tilted the phone away from me in one smooth motion and said it was just Sarah, who loved dramatic language. I did not argue. I told Leo to give her a hug, and he did, wrapping his small arms around her legs, while she shifted her weight to avoid wrinkling the dress. Then she straightened, said she hoped I would not sit at home and sulk, and reached for the door handle. We stepped out into the stairwell, and the air already felt cooler and harder. On the landing, I asked once more if she understood how it looked when she joked about being single and needing to flirt to feel alive. She rolled her eyes and told me I cared too much about what other people thought, that a bit of teasing never killed a marriage, that I needed to stop putting chains on her fun. She said her friends thought I was stuck in some old idea of marriage and that I should be grateful she even invited me to these nights at all. She framed it all as my problem, my sensitivity, my control issues, not as anything she chose to do. I realized if I pushed now, she would run to the group chat with new stories about my behavior long before I could explain my side. So I took a breath, told her I hoped she would remember that she had a husband and a son waiting at home, and stepped back into the apartment to finish helping Leo get ready for bed. As I closed the door, I heard the soft metal echo of the latch clicking, and at the same time saw, through the narrowing gap, her thumb move quickly over the phone screen, covering another message from the flame emoji contact. Later that night, after I had read Leo a story and watched him fall asleep with his toy car still in his hand, I sat for a while in the quiet apartment thinking about how many chances I had given this pattern. I looked at our mugs on the kitchen counter, standing side by side, and wondered if they would soon move apart without anyone admitting why. I thought about just staying home and waiting for her to stumble back with new excuses, but a heavier thought pushed in. If I kept only feeling and not seeing, I would always be one step behind whatever story she later told. So, a little after 11, I called our neighbor from the floor below, a retired woman who liked Leo and had watched him before, and asked if she could sit with him for an hour while I checked something near the city center. I did not give details, and she did not ask. Once I knew he was safe, I took my jacket, my wallet, and my phone, and walked out into the cool night. The club sat downtown, under a row of bright signs, and beside a narrow alley where people went to smoke and talk. When I reached the entrance, the air smelled of alcohol, perfume, and the heavy bass pushing through the walls. I paid the cover, walked past the tired bouncer, and climbed the stairs into the main room. Loud music filled the space. Lights flashed in colors that made faces look strange, and bodies moved close together on the dance floor. I scanned the crowd until I found Talia near the center, surrounded by Sarah and a few other friends from her job. She looked like she belonged more to the lights and the beat than to our small kitchen. I stepped closer and saw that she was smiling in a way I had not seen at home for a long time. When she noticed me, her face changed for just a moment, then she turned the expression into something polite and almost bored, as if I were a coworker she had not expected, not a husband. I stayed on the edge of their circle, watching. Sarah leaned in close to Talia and whispered something, then both of them looked at me and laughed. The group formed a loose ring around her, and I realized I had been pushed toward the outside of my own life. A song with a heavy beat started, and people cheered. Talia moved closer to the DJ booth, where a young man in a plain shirt, Miko, who I recognized from other nights as a bartender and part-time DJ, joined their group. He had that practiced kind of charm that looks harmless until you notice how often he rests his hand on someone's waist. Talia pointed at me and said something I could not hear over the music, and the group laughed again. I watched her reach into her small purse, take out her phone, tap the screen, and then look up at Miko with a bright, fake, innocent smile. She held the phone out, and he tapped his own device against it, sending contact details. Then I saw her type quickly, save something, and slip a small card into his hand, a backup number for when the app failed. It was not private. She did it right there, in the open, with Sarah cheering and others clapping like it was part of a show. In that moment, I felt something quiet inside me snap, not in a way that made me want to yell, but in a way that made me suddenly very cold and clear. My mind recorded the time, the song, the way her eyes flicked to me to see if I would explode. I did not give her that drama. I walked to the bar, put my half-finished drink down, and paused. To my left, Sarah stood telling someone that Talia was finally showing her husband how a real woman gets attention, that this would teach me not to be so stiff. I heard my own name mixed with the word controlling, said with a laugh. I slid my hand into my pocket, opened a simple recording app, and let it run with the microphone pointed toward their voices. I did not wave the phone or announce anything, I just let it collect the noise they were so proud to make. When I stepped back toward the edge of the dance floor, Talia met my eyes. She was standing now almost chest to chest with Miko, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder like she was weighing his balance. She tilted her head in that teasing way she used when we first met, but there was no warmth in it now. That look had become a weapon. She leaned closer to him, said something into his ear, and he smiled, squeezing the card in his hand. The group around them began a small chant, something about freedom and living your best life, and for a second I realized they had turned my marriage into a party game. I knew that if I tried to talk there, she would twist every word later. So I stepped closer until I was just within her hearing, and I told her in a calm voice that if she needed to give her number to another man for fun, then she could also live with the real meaning of that choice. I told her good luck with whatever came next, turned, and walked away toward the exit. I did not push anyone or grab at her arm. I did not throw anything or shout. I simply left the arena where she had turned me into an unwilling actor. Outside, the air was cooler and tasted less like other people's breath. I walked onto the small smoking patio, which was half empty now, and felt the bass from inside thrumming through the ground under my shoes. Behind me, I heard the club door open, and for a second I wondered if she had followed me, but it was only Sarah and another friend. They laughed loudly and pointed at my back, calling me dramatic. I saw, from the corner of my eye, Sarah lift her phone and snap a picture of me walking away, my shoulders set, my hands in my pockets. She showed the screen to her friend, then started typing a caption. I did not turn around. I walked toward the narrow side alley that led to the street, and as I reached the end of the building, my phone buzzed in my pocket. When I pulled it out, the screen lit up with a notification from the app where Talia loved to post. I saw that I had been tagged in a new story, and the thumbnail was the same picture of my back that Sarah had just taken, glowing under a short line about how some husbands cannot handle a little fun, the phone still vibrating in my hand as I stepped away from the noise. The first workday after the club felt wrong from the moment I woke up. Even though the sky outside the window was bright and clear, as if nothing important had shifted, Talia moved around the bedroom humming to herself, acting lighter than she had in weeks, and that lightness told me more about where her joy came from than any angry word could have. She told me she would be late because they had a campaign meeting, and she made a small joke about hoping I would not storm into her office the way I had stormed out of the club. She seemed pleased with that version of events, pleased enough that I knew she had already started telling it to someone. At the kitchen table, Leo asked if we were still going to the park like I had promised, and I told him we would go in the afternoon after I finished my shift. He asked if Mommy would come too, and I had to say that she was busy. He accepted the answer, but I saw how carefully he folded his drawing of us and slid it into his school folder, as if he did not fully trust that it would ever make it onto the fridge. At the hospital, the morning noise swallowed me up at first. The IT office sat in a low corner of the building, half underground, with cables snaking along the walls and 2 rows of desks facing each other. I walked in, greeted my coworkers with the same nod I had given them 100 times before, and sat down at my station. A stream of tickets waited in my inbox. Login issues, printer problems, requests for password resets. Usually the routine calmed my mind. That day, I felt like I was working underwater. As I moved from machine to machine, I noticed small shifts. A nurse who normally chatted with me about her cat fell silent when I entered the break room and quickly locked her phone. A pharmacy tech glanced at me, then back at a screen and said something low to the person next to her. I could not always hear the words, but I recognized my name in their rhythm, stretched a little with gossip. After an hour, a message from my supervisor, Thomas, appeared in my email with a simple request for a quick word. His office was a glass box near the back of the floor, with a view of a service corridor and a humming server rack. When I stepped inside and closed the door, he leaned forward with his elbows on the desk, his expression careful. He told me he had noticed some chatter on social media involving my name and a club incident. He said a nurse had shown him a story where my wife and her friend described me walking out and abandoning her on the dance floor. He made it clear that he did not want details, but he had to ask if everything at home was safe and if any of it would bring conflict into the hospital. I told him that nothing violent had happened, that I had left instead of fighting, and that my work would remain steady. I added in plain words that people were hearing only one version of the story, one that left out the part where my wife handed her number to another man while her friends filmed like it was a game. Tomas listened, then nodded slowly and said he did not want to see anyone dragged into online drama because of personal choices, but he was relieved that I was calm. He reminded me he needed my head clear for the upcoming software update, and I promised him it would be. Back at my desk, I opened my phone on my lap, hidden from the room by the angle of my chair. I navigated to Talia's profile and saw the story from the night before, now saved in her highlights as a funny memory. The short video Sarah had posted showed my back leaving the club, covered by a caption about a husband who could not handle his wife having a little fun. There were laughing emojis and comments from people I barely knew, agreeing that she deserved better than a man who walked away when she was just joking. No one asked why she had wanted another man's number in the first place. I took a slow breath and tapped the buttons to capture the screen, saving each piece to my gallery. Then I plugged my phone into my computer and copied the images into a new folder on my desktop. I labeled 2 folders, Archive A and Archive B, plain names that meant nothing to anyone but me, and dropped the new files into one of them. After that, I opened the spreadsheet I had started at home and added a row with the date, the name of the club, the fact that my supervisor had already heard about the incident, and a short note about the saved story. I was not a detective and did not pretend to be, but I worked with systems every day, and I knew that scattered data is easy to dismiss. Organized data is harder to ignore. Throughout the day, small hints of the story passed by me like driftwood. 2 nurses in the corridor laughed about a TikTok trend involving partners giving their numbers to strangers to see how jealous their men were, and one of them said my wife had done something similar. Another staff member, a lab tech, mentioned to a colleague that she followed Talia's page and thought I should loosen up. None of them spoke directly to me, which was almost worse. They built a version of me between themselves, someone stiff and humorless, without hearing my voice. I kept moving, fixed a stubborn printer, replaced a keyboard, and every time I felt anger move up my chest, I reminded myself that anger was cheap and evidence was not. After my shift, I stopped at the supermarket near our building to pick up groceries. The fluorescent lights and organized aisles made a sharp contrast with the dim club and the hospital's muted hallways. I pushed a cart past stacked boxes of cereal and bags of rice, thinking about the park trip I had promised Leo. I wanted, more than anything, to give him one part of his day that did not feel like a battlefield. I felt myself starting to relax as I moved through the aisles, but that calm cracked when I turned into the queue for the checkout and saw Sarah standing 2 lines over with another woman from Talia's office. They noticed me almost immediately. Sarah lifted her hand in a lazy wave and called my name loud enough that people around us glanced up from their items. She stepped closer with her own basket and said with a little smile that she hoped I had recovered from my dramatic exit. She told her friend, in a tone meant for me to hear, that I had walked out like a movie character, leaving poor Talia alone in a room full of men. She made it sound like a cruel act instead of a measured retreat. Then she pulled out her phone and opened the saved club story. The image of my back filled the screen, my shoulders rigid, my figure made small by the bright lights and dancing shadows. The caption blamed me for not being able to handle a little harmless flirting. She turned the phone so that I could see it clearly, and she waited for a reaction. I did not give her one. I asked, instead, in a low voice, how long after that photo had been taken Talia had started messaging Miko. Sarah blinked, surprised that I knew his name, then laughed and said something about how, of course, I had gone through Talia's phone. Of course, I had checked. She said I was obsessed with details and that it was not healthy. As she spoke, her phone vibrated in her hand with new notifications. She opened a group chat full of colorful icons and usernames, where more messages about the club night rolled in. Someone had dropped a screenshot into the thread, showing the start of a conversation between Talia and Miko from just after midnight. The timestamp lined up almost perfectly with the time I remembered leaving the club. There were heart icons and a comment about how fun it had been to meet someone who knew how to see her. Sarah laughed again and told me the conversation was nothing, just friendly, then added that if I kept acting like this, I would drive my wife away completely. I looked at the screen long enough to memorize what I needed, then turned back to my own groceries. When it was my turn at the checkout, I set items on the belt in a steady rhythm, listened to the soft beep of each one passing over the scanner, and paid without rushing. Behind me, Sarah's group chat kept chiming, short, high-pitched tones, as someone commented that I was in the store and told her to film my reaction. She did not get what she wanted. I picked up my bag, nodded once in a neutral way, and walked out into the parking lot. In the dim winter light, I placed the bag on the front seat, then sat behind the wheel for a moment with the engine off. My phone was a small weight in my hand, its screen still dark from the last notification. When I unlocked it, I opened a message thread I had created with myself entitled Follow-Up. In it, I wrote a few short lines. The date, the supermarket encounter, the fact that someone had shared the screenshot of Talia and Miko's chat into the group, the way Sarah had laughed about harmless fun. Then I locked the phone again and started the car. The sky over the city was the color of steel, and I felt like I was driving forward on a road that had already narrowed, even though I was still trying to tell myself there might be another path. The next time the story surfaced, it came from the smallest mouth in our house. The following afternoon, I took Leo to the park, as promised. The playground sat near a line of bare trees, with swings, a slide, and a worn patch of ground where teenagers sometimes gathered at night. In the daylight, it belonged to children again. Leo ran toward the swings, dragging me by the hand, and I pushed him gently, watching his feet rise and fall against the empty air. For a while, the movement seemed to wipe his mind clean. He shouted about how high he wanted to go, about the shape of the clouds, about a bird that had landed on the fence. Then, between pushes, in a quieter voice, he asked why everyone said I had left Mommy because she was having fun. The words came out of him in a rush, like something he had tried not to ask but could no longer hold back. I felt the chain of the swing go slack for a heartbeat as my hands paused, then I forced myself to push again so that he would not feel the jolt of my shock. I asked who had said that, and he told me he had heard May say it on the phone, and also an aunt at the dinner where they had talked about the club. He repeated the phrase exactly, in the flat tone children use when they are copying adults. Daddy left Mommy in a club because he could not handle her having fun. Hearing it in his voice made it feel worse than any comment online. I told him, carefully, that sometimes adults repeat stories that do not include all the pieces, and that this was not the whole truth. I said that what happened at the club was not his fault, and that whatever changes came next, he would still be loved and cared for. I did not tell him about the number, the card, the flirtation. Those were details for courts or counselors, not for a 7-year-old sitting on a swing. He nodded slowly, letting the words sink in, but I could see that he was filing them away next to the other stories he had heard, trying to decide which one to believe. That evening, we went to a family restaurant for a joint birthday dinner for Darren and May. The place had bright lights, polite staff, and a long table reserved under the Arden name. When we arrived, Talia's parents were already seated at one end, surrounded by a few uncles, a pair of cousins, and a couple of neighbors. Talia stood near them, dressed in another showy outfit, her phone on the table beside her plate, lit up with notifications even before she sat down. As Leo and I approached, I saw them all laughing at something, and then a small quiet fell as they noticed me. It was the kind of pause that says the person walking in has already been the topic of conversation. We took our seats, and almost immediately May steered the talk toward the club night. She asked in a bright, false cheerful tone if I had calmed down after my little performance. She described my exit as dramatic, like something out of a film, and repeated the same line I had just heard from Leo, that some husbands could not handle their wives having fun. She told the story of Talia handing her number to a man on the dance floor as if it were a silly test, a way to see if I trusted her. She left out the part where the man kept the number. She left out the part where her daughter had looked back at me with a challenge in her eyes. She made it sound like a harmless prank that I had ruined by being uptight. At the other end of the table, Darren added that men flirted all the time, and wives forgave them. So maybe this was my chance to prove I was big-hearted. He said that holding a grudge over what he called a joke would make me look weak, and that a real husband knew when to close his eyes. Talia watched my face closely as they spoke, searching again for a reaction she could use later. When I did not snap, she took her own turn. She told everyone that she had only been playing, that she had never planned to actually use the number, that I had embarrassed her by walking out and leaving her alone. She said she had cried in the bathroom because she thought I did not love her enough to stay and fight for her. The version of me at that table was a stranger. In their mouths, I became a man who abandoned his wife over a laugh. No one mentioned that I had stayed calm, that I had not touched anyone, that I had left to prevent something worse. I could have pulled out my phone then, opened the saved story, shown them the screenshot of the chat with Miko starting a few minutes after I left. I could have forced them to look at timestamps and captions. Instead, I felt for the phone under the table and simply unlocked it long enough to open my follow-up thread. With my thumb resting lightly on the glass, I recorded a few words. The restaurant name, the way May had phrased her accusation, the way Darren had framed forgiveness as my job and not Talia's. Then I locked the screen and placed the device face down on my thigh. Later, when dessert was finished and people had moved on to talking about car repairs and school fees, I excused myself to find the restroom. On the way, I passed a small staff area where a calendar hung on the wall, full of notes and colored lines. One date near the end of the month was circled in red, with only 3 initials written beside it. Something about that red circle caught my attention, because it reminded me of the empty circle I still had on our own kitchen planner at home, the one I had drawn when I first created the harbor reminder. It made me think of how people try to claim time with ink and pretend that makes it theirs. I stood there for a moment, staring at the circle, thinking about how I would soon need to claim a piece of time for something very different. Not a party, but a quiet meeting with someone who spoke the language of custody and property. After the dinner, back at our apartment, the lines drawn at that table followed us through the door. Leo went to his room with a stomach full of cake and a mind full of half-heard comments. I helped him change and watched him fall asleep with his arms around his stuffed animal, then turned off the light. In the hallway, our wall planner waited with its neat squares. I took a pen, circled a date in red, and wrote only a time next to it. I did not add any description. To anyone else, it would look like another appointment. To me, it was a marker on the path I had started drawing silently in my head. Later, I stepped out onto the small balcony to breathe. The night air was cool and carried the faint smell of other people's dinners and cigarettes from the street below. Inside, the television played softly as background noise. Talia was on the couch with her phone pressed to her ear, speaking in a low but intense voice. She did not know I was near enough to hear. I listened as she told May that I was trying to punish her for one silly night, that I was acting like a controlling man from some old story. She said that if I kept this up, she would make sure I never saw Leo unless it was on her terms. The words were clear, not metaphor, not heat-of-the-moment exaggeration. She was talking about using our son as leverage. While she spoke, my own phone, resting on the small balcony table, lit up with an incoming call from an unknown number labeled only as private. The screen glowed in the dark, casting a pale square of light on the tiles. I let it ring without answering, listening instead to the thread of Talia's voice through the open balcony door. Her threats settled into me, not as a surprise, but as confirmation of what I had already started to feel in my bones. Inside, she laughed at something May said, then repeated that she would handle me if I tried anything. Outside, the private call went to mist, and the notification stayed on the screen like a small, silent reminder that there were still people I could reach out to who would speak in a language different from hers. The next days did not explode, they sank. On the surface, everything still looked like a normal life if you did not look too closely. I woke up, made breakfast, packed Leo's bag, and walked him to school. I went to the hospital, fixed computers, and answered tickets. I walked home along the same streets. Inside those simple movements, something was changing. After the dinner and the balcony call, I understood that Talia and her parents were not just trying to excuse the club night. They were ready to use our son and the word legal as weapons. Once I heard her say she would limit my time with Leo if I pushed her, something inside me stopped reaching for more chances. I did not shout, did not threaten her back. Instead, I started to treat my own life the way I treated broken systems at work. I began by changing where I slept. The first night I moved into the guest room, I noticed the mattress had the faint shape of bodies that had rested there at odd hours. I did not ask questions. I took off the sheets, washed them, and made the bed as if it were a clean page. I told Talia we both needed space and that separate beds would help us avoid useless arguments. She said it suited her fine, claimed she was tired of sleeping next to someone who judged her breathing. The way she said it made it clear she saw me as a problem, not a partner. In the kitchen, our mugs drifted apart without anyone naming it. Her cup stayed near the window, and her phone charger, surrounded by beauty magazines and open messages. Mine moved to the other counter, beside the small desk where I kept my laptop. At night, when she was out at late campaign meetings, I sat at that desk and opened my folders. I took the plain binders labeled Home, Auto, and Bank from the bottom shelf and placed them in a row. Then I added a new, slightly thicker folder and wrote Household on the spine. Into that one, I slipped printed screenshots of Talia's stories, images of Sarah's tags, and notes about what people had said at the hospital and at the restaurant. I printed out a copy of the saved chat screenshot where she and Miko started talking just after midnight. I did not write insults on the pages. I wrote only dates, names, and short lines about what was visible. I knew that if I ever showed this to someone official, they would not need my feelings. They would need facts. Once the folder felt heavier than the other binders, I slid it into the desk drawer. Along the side, I taped a small USB stick labeled only with the date. It held backups of the screenshots, the club story, and the audio recording from the bar, saved and copied twice. I locked the drawer with a new key I had made, a small silver one that sat on my ring next to the apartment keys. When I turned it, the click sounded final in the quiet room. At the hospital, the gossip did not stop just because I ignored it. One evening near the end of my shift, I walked through the underground parking garage to my car and heard two staff members talking near the stairwell. They mentioned my name, the club, and a post Talia had made about rebuilding her life away from jealousy. They repeated her words as if they were lines from a show. I stopped by my car, put my headphones on, and pretended to scroll on my phone. In truth, I opened my recording app and let it capture their low voices talking about timelines, posts, and how the husband stormed out because she was too much woman for him. I did not plan to hurt them with it. I only wanted a clear record that the story had spread into my workplace, not through my behavior, but through hers. That same week, I went to see my mother. Rona lived in a small apartment near a school with houseplants in chipped mugs and books piled on the coffee table. She had heard parts of the story already, enough to know something was wrong. I sat on her old couch and told her, slowly and without drama, about the club, the number, the group chat, the dinner, the balcony call. I did not ask her to hate Talia, I only asked her to listen. She held her hands together and stayed quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said that what I was describing did not sound like simple mistakes anymore. It sounded like a line of choices. She told me that when people start using children as pieces in their fights and wave the word legal around like a threat, it is not enough to hope they will calm down. She said I needed to start thinking about protecting myself and Leo with more than patience. She did not tell me exactly what to do, but she did tell me to write everything down and to speak with someone who understood how these things worked. On the bus ride home, I opened my phone and scrolled to my calendar. I created a new event on a morning 3 days away, titled Meeting Personal, with the location marked as Dockside 8:30 a.m. Dockside was the name of a quiet cafe near the water, different from the harbor I had used before, a place where the staff did not know us and no one from our families went. I set a gentle alarm for it and then locked the screen. Later that night, when the house was dark and Talia had not yet returned, I sat again at my desk and looked at the row of folders. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a bridge I had built slowly without fully admitting where it led. Not long after midnight, I heard the door open, the soft stumble of her shoes, and the sound of her whispering on the phone in the hallway. Her voice was low, but the words still came through. She told someone that I was getting worse, that I was acting like a detective, that if I tried to pull something, she would make sure I never saw Leo except on strict terms. She mentioned her parents again, said they would back her. I stayed in the guest room, listening to the words fade as she closed the bedroom door. My phone lay next to me on the bedside table. A small alarm label at the bottom of the screen read, "Paper drop, set for a morning not far away." I watched the digits change, felt my heartbeat slow, and understood I had finally crossed from just surviving her choices to planning my own. A week later, the day came when I turned planning into action. It started like many others, with Leo's sleepy face at the breakfast table and the smell of toast in the air. I poured juice, checked his homework, and helped him tie his shoes. Talia sat across from us, scrolling her phone, pausing only to complain about a comment she did not like under one of her posts. She had no idea where I would go after I left the apartment. When we walked Leo to school, he held both our hands but leaned a little more toward me, like someone bracing against a wind. At the gate, I knelt and told him I would pick him up at the usual time, that his afternoon would be the same. He nodded and asked if we were still angry at each other at home. I told him that I was working on a way to make the house calmer and safer for him, and that he did not need to fix anything. He squeezed my neck, then ran toward his friends. From the school, I did not go straight to the hospital. I took a different bus and rode it to the courthouse district, watching the buildings grow more serious as we moved. The sky was low and gray, and the air smelled like rain and car exhaust. When I walked up the courthouse steps, the stone felt cold under my shoes. Inside, the lobby was bright and plain, with metal detectors, security staff, and a few people sitting on benches holding folders and bags. I passed through the scanner with my own folder under my arm, the one labeled Household, and the guard barely looked at me. On the second floor, in a narrow office marked only with an official sign, I met with a legal professional whose name I had been given after my dockside meeting. We sat at a simple desk. I placed my binder on the table and opened it, showing dates, screenshots, and notes in a calm, steady order. I talked the way I did when I explained technical problems at work. Clearly, slowly, with no extra drama. I said that my wife had given her number to another man in public, that she and her friends had turned it into a running story online, that the story had reached my workplace. I said that her parents were pressuring me to accept it as a joke, and that she had threatened to use our son as leverage if I pushed her. I said that I did not want revenge, that I did not want to destroy her, but that I did want a divorce and a clear custody plan that kept things stable for Leo. The legal person listened, asked a few questions about dates and routines, and then slid some papers across the desk for me to read. The words were simple but heavy. They described a petition to dissolve our marriage, temporary orders regarding how money and property would be handled while things were decided, and a proposed schedule for shared care of our son, one that would keep his school and basic rhythm the same. I read each part twice, feeling the difference between thinking about leaving and signing my name to it. Then I picked up the pen and wrote my name in the spaces where it was needed. My hand did not shake. I placed the pen down, closed my binder, and watched as the papers were collected and moved into another stack that would travel through halls and boxes and screens until they became something more than sheets of printed words. When I walked back out into the lobby, I did not feel free, but I felt something like a floor under my feet that had not been there before. From the courthouse, I went to the hospital and slipped back into my normal role. I reset a frozen workstation, answered a call about a password, checked a backup log. Only Thomas knew that I had personal matters in progress, and even he did not know the details. Around midday, my phone buzzed gently with a reminder. Paper drop. I looked at the time. The meeting in the cafeteria I had suggested to Talia the night before was set for just after lunch. I had told her in a short message that we needed to talk about Leo's schedule and that it would be best to meet somewhere quiet but public, like the hospital cafeteria where I could not be accused of trying to scare her. She had agreed in a sharp reply, saying she was tired of secret talks in our kitchen. When the lunch break came, I walked down to the cafeteria and chose a table near the back wall where I could see both the main entrance and the small printer near the nurse's station. I bought a coffee and sat with my binder closed at my feet. I did not have to do anything more. The next steps did not belong to me. A neutral man with a plain envelope in his hand entered the cafeteria and quietly checked in at the door. I recognized him from a brief description and gave a small nod when our eyes met. Then I looked away and focused on my coffee. A few minutes later, I saw Talia through the glass entrance. She stepped inside with her phone in her hand, her face set in that angry, ready-for-battle expression I knew too well. Through the phone speaker, I could hear May's voice urging her to make him explain himself and not let me twist anything. Talia scanned the room, saw me at the table, and started walking fast in my direction, her heels sharp against the floor. Before she could reach me, the man with the envelope stepped into her path. He spoke her full name in a clear, polite tone and asked her to confirm it. She frowned and asked what this was about. He said he had documents for her, that his task would be finished once she accepted them. She said yes to her name, still confused, and he placed the envelope in her hand. At that exact moment, the small printer by the nurse's station began to spool, the soft whir of its rollers filling the space between voices. Talia looked down at the envelope, then up at me, then back at the envelope again. Slowly, she opened the top and pulled out the first page. I watched her eyes move across the lines that named both of us and used the words petition for dissolution and temporary orders, words that turned all the quiet notes and hidden folders into something real. Her face shifted from anger to shock, then to something like fear. May's voice on the phone rose in pitch, asking what the papers said, but Talia did not answer right away. She just stared at me across the cafeteria, holding the pages in hands that trembled a little. I did not smile, did not speak loudly, did not throw any of her own lines back at her. I only told her, in the same calm voice I had used in our kitchen, that from now on I would handle everything properly, through the right channels, and that any talks about Leo would follow the schedule and rules in those papers. She opened her mouth as if to shout something, but the sound of the printer grew louder for a second as it spat out another sheet, and the noise swallowed her first word. Around us, staff and a few patients kept eating, some looking up, some not. For the first time since she had given her number to a stranger on a dance floor and called it a joke, I felt that I was not standing alone in my version of events. The documents in her hand, the neutral man, the public space, and the simple sound of the printer all stood with me. I watched her grip the envelope tighter, watched the light from the cafeteria windows pass through the thin paper, and I knew that whatever came next, the story was no longer just something told in group chats and at family tables.